I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. Today's episode is all about myth busting, and in particular, nutritional myth busting and the facts behind the hype. So nutritional misinformation, misperceptions, misunderstandings are often passed along so repeatedly and for so long that they become accepted as solid fact, as science, as truth, when the reality is there's often very little science or truth behind these myths. And there are literally thousands that we could cover here. And there's, I'm sure, a ton that you hear all the time or things that you wonder, is that a myth? You can always email me. I want to hear your feedback, hear the things that you hear often or you have questions about. But there's literally thousands. I have narrowed it down to my list that I hear a lot to help set the record straight. And then I also reached out to my health professional colleagues, registered dietitians, personal trainers, and physician assistants to say, what are the things you're hearing from your patients and clients on a regular basis that kind of drive you nuts that we want to help set the record straight? The other thing is when we are kind of living by these myths and misperceptions, we're maybe making decisions about our health, our diet, our habits that really don't have any impact, or we're doing it because we think this is a fact or this is a reality, when we actually don't need to waste our time and our energy doing these things or incorporating these things into our life or avoiding certain things, all because of that misinformation. So here's our stab at our top 10 categories of nutrition myths that we will hope to dispel.
Number 10.
Black pepper stays in our stomach for years. So this is something that I've had clients, chefs, all have thought that this is true and specifically try to avoid using black pepper for this reason, instead opting for things like white pepper or cayenne pepper, which is fine. But if you want to use black pepper, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So just to make sure though, and just to, again, make sure I wasn't making an assumption that was also not true, I talked with several different gastroenterologists, and one was very specific. He said that in 60,000 scopes, he has never seen any black pepper in any lining of GI tracts. So he said absolutely no reason to think that black pepper is going to stay in the lining of our GI tracts for years, and that in his tens of thousands of scopes, he's never seen it. So why do people think this? There's probably tons of reasons of where this myth started, but a lot of physicians think, and I agree, that it probably started with the fact that that fibrous outer covering of the peppercorn isn't digested. But just like other types of dietary fiber, the particles of that little black casing of the peppercorn just passes through our systems undigested, but they don't accumulate for years as the myth suggests.
Number 9.
Sea salt has less sodium than regular table salt. That is a really big misconception. So many people, when they're diagnosed with high blood pressure, for example, will make the switch from regular table salt to sea salt and think that they are going for a lower sodium option. So here's the thing, when you're looking at salt, ounce for ounce, sea salt and just regular table salt have about the same amount of sodium, ounce for ounce. That sea salt, though, does have a bigger granule. So if you're measuring it tablespoon for tablespoon or teaspoon for teaspoon, those granules are so big, they don't pack in tightly. So it actually does have slightly less sodium for sea salt, but that's only because it's not able to pack as tightly into that spoon. So looking at the stats for a quarter teaspoon, it's about 580 milligrams for regular table salt compared to 480 for that sea salt. So a little bit different, but still not a giant savings. The biggest difference is the effect of the flavor of it, the flavor impact. Sea salt does have that larger granule, which means that it takes longer to dissolve on our tongue. So we can get by with less of it and still get that same impact, that same flavor impact when we're using it in our food. Another tip is to add salt last. So if you're using a salt grinder, add it last, because then you're tasting the food along the way. You can add other spices, seasonings, different acids, vinegars, citrus to punch up that flavor without the salt. And then if you hit it with just a little bit of sea salt right at the end, It's not all dissolving into it, and you again get more maximum impact of that sea salt.
Number 8.
White wine has more sugar than red wine. So, this is something that is stated as if it's fact all the time. And the reality is that the exact stats vary a little bit by type of wine, but most types of red or white wine, and also champagne actually, have less than 2 grams of sugar in a 6 ounce glass. Now, that doesn't apply to something like dessert wines or ports, of course, but if you're looking at something like a Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, a Cabernet, these are all going to have just about 2 grams of sugar for a 6 ounce glass. So, red wine does have a higher antioxidant content, the phenolic compounds, because of the seeds and skins of the grapes that are used to make the red wine. But there's so many other foods that we're getting our antioxidants from. We don't have to make the choice of red wine to get our antioxidants. So, whether your choice is white or red, you are still getting about 150 calories per 6 ounce glass of wine. So it's still important to factor that into your daily intake. And of course, we always look at moderation. A drink a day for women, not more than 2 for men.
Number 7.
You should steer clear of fruit altogether because it's full of sugar. This is one that pretty much every dietitian that I ask, what are the top myths that kind of drive them nuts? This was on their list. And it's said to us in a whole bunch of different ways, but the bottom line is so many people don't eat fruit because of the sugar content. So the reality is that, yes, nearly all fruits are high in sugar, but they're also, many of them are really great sources of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytochemicals. So the key is to look at which fruits give us the most bang for our buck. So berries are my favorites. Berries are my top recommendation. Blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, blackberries, they're all going to have a higher fiber content, a lower sugar content, and also a higher water content. So while they do still have sugar in them, we actually get a very big sense of fullness, a high sense of satisfaction. They give us a lot of volume for the amount of sugar that they have. When we look at the reverse, the opposite of that, bananas actually take the lead in calorie dense fresh fruit. So when it comes to dried fruit, of course, they're all going to be very calorie dense because the water is removed and you're left with just the sugar of that dried fruit. But when it comes to fresh fruit, bananas take the lead. They are the most calorie dense. They have about 50% more carbs than other types of fruits like berries. So if you are looking for how do I get the most nutritional bang for the buck when it comes to sugar and fruits, go with the berries. But really, all fruits, fresh or frozen, are going to be a great addition. But to keep our sugars in check, I do recommend to limit, if not eliminate, fruit juice. But bottom line here, it's a shame to avoid fruits altogether. So be selective, go with those ones that you love, and add them into smoothies. Incorporate them into your day, have them as that sweet treat.
Number 6.
Carrots are high in sugar. This is one that I have been hearing for years, and it breaks my heart because it is a huge misconception. People who love carrots aren't eating them because they think that they shouldn't. And the reality is that a cup of carrots has less than 6 grams of sugar and only 50 calories. They actually have a lower sugar content than a cup of strawberries and much lower than even a cup of milk. So the whole carrots are high in sugar myth, it's based on glycemic index, which is a good tool, but it's unfortunately often misinterpreted when it comes to certain foods. So when we look at glycemic index, a simple way of explaining it is that it's basically a measure of how carbohydrate foods impact our blood sugar and insulin levels. And so carrots are classified as high glycemic which means that they would cause a sharp rise in our blood sugar and insulin levels. Here's the catch though. Glycemic index is based on consuming or eating 50 grams of carbohydrates at once, and that's of that food alone. So we would have to eat 5 cups of carrots to have this high glycemic impact on our blood sugar and insulin levels. 5 cups. And that would be 5 cups of carrots with nothing else with it. No proteins, no fats to slow down that effect. So how often are we doing that? Not much. So is it possible to get too much sugar from carrots? It's possible, yes, but it's not likely. And really, when is the last time that anyone told you or any of us feel like that extra weight is a direct result of eating too many carrots? This also applies to beets, by the way. So beets pretty much same example, really high in vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. So many good reasons for us to eat beets, just like carrots, but they do have a higher sugar content than other vegetables. But when we compare it to the big scope of things and all the foods that we can include in our diets, these are two that I would keep on the list because we're getting nutrients from beets and carrots that we're not getting from those leafy greens. Those colors are a direct reflection of the nutrients inside of them. So to me, it's a shame to not eat them. And when we're looking at the big scheme of things, they are a drop in the bucket when it comes to sugar sources in our diet.
Number 5.
Sweet potatoes are lower in calories, carbs, and sugars than white potatoes. So here's the reality. This is another glycemic index misrepresentation. So here's the deal. Ounce for ounce, sweet potatoes and white potatoes have right at the same carb and calorie content. And sweet potatoes actually have a higher sugar content, about 8 grams of sugar for a medium sweet potato, compared to about 1.2 grams of sugar for the same size white potato. Sweet potatoes are higher in fiber. They have about 6 grams of fiber compared to less than 3 grams for a white potato. So they are digested at a slower rate, which helps to classify them as low glycemic. So the bottom line, while sweet potatoes may have more fiber, which helps us stay fuller longer, they still have about the same carbs and calories as white potatoes with an even slightly higher sugar content. So if you're trying to dial back on those starchy carbs, don't think that you're doing a better thing by replacing those white potatoes with sweet potatoes. Same thing, by the way, essentially applies to brown rice for white and whole grain pasta for white pasta.
Number 4.
Quinoa is high in protein. I can't tell you how many people have told me they started adding more quinoa to their diet because it's high in protein. So here's the deal. It does have protein, but it only has about 8 grams of protein per cup and 40 grams of carbohydrate. Now, and it's about 220 calories per cup. So while it is decent in protein and it's got a decent fiber and iron content, it's also got a really high ratio of carbs for the amount of protein that you're getting. And when you compare it to something like black beans, for example, or really most types of beans, black beans have double the protein and 3 times the fiber of quinoa with about 30% more iron. And if we look at something like spinach, it has a fraction of the calories and twice as much iron as quinoa. So not that it's a bad thing at all, but a lot of people are adding quinoa to their diet in place of lean proteins. So if you're not concerned about carbs or calories, doing this is totally fine. But if you want to use quinoa as a protein substitute in place of that lean meat or poultry or seafood, do be aware that it is a calorie-dense protein alternative. And there's plenty of other non-meat options that have way more protein, fiber, and iron for far fewer carbs and calories.
Number 3.
I'm afraid my body lotion is making me fat. All right, I'm going to let that one sink in for a bit. And if you listen to it and you're like, oh my God, nobody thinks that, that's what I thought. And then I had a friend ask me, and I had somebody else ask me, and I thought, why are people wondering if their lotion is making them fat? So I Googled it, and there is a whole host of things online that for decades, from at least as far back as the 50s, and I'm sure before that, some of these ultra strict, really fad diets, not recommended diets, over the years have recommended that, okay, you follow this really strict diet. You know, it's kind of like the eat a grapefruit and half a piece of toast type diet, cutting out all fats from our diet, but also cutting out all fats from that we use topically. So no lotions, no oils that contain fats, not even lip balm that contains fats. So those diets that have been around for decades, and some of them kind of resurface with different names, has probably kind of planted the seed for some people that using oils topically might cause them to gain extra body fat. So I did actually get this question from several people. One of them is a good friend of mine, and she had been making these great lotions out of, coconut oil and almond oil and all these essential oils, and they were just fabulous. She had given it to me as a gift, and then when I ran out, she had stopped making them because she thought she was gaining weight from using these oils. So we set the record straight with her. But before I did, I thought, okay, this is my knee-jerk reaction that this isn't possible, that this is ridiculous. But started thinking about, okay, there's transdermal medications, there's other chemicals that can enter our body through our skin. So I decided, let me ask some of the experts, some of the dermatologists who are expert in their field and see, what's their take on it. So the short answer, yes, it is absolutely a myth that body lotions and oils will cause weight gain. That's not going to happen. So again, myth has been around forever. And let's be honest, when it comes to weight gain, it's a lot easier for us to want to point the finger at what we're putting on our bodies and lotions and potions instead of actually taking a closer look at our eating habits. So when I talked to several different dermatologists in the field, basically oils like coconut oil won't get past the epidermal layer of the skin, and that fat layer is much in the deeper levels of the dermis, and it's not likely that this lotion is ever going to penetrate down to that layer of skin. That's kind of the across the board answer I got. And also, these oils won't enter our bloodstream to be metabolized, not only to not be stored as body fat, but they also won't raise our blood levels of cholesterol or triglycerides or anything like that. So they're replenishing our skin, but they aren't doing anything to our bodies beyond that as far as storing body fat or raising cholesterol or triglycerides. So go ahead and hydrate your skin from the outside in and don't worry about added body fat.
Number 2.
Muscle turns to fat if you stop working out. How many people do you hear say this? And people will say it about themselves. I used to be so strong. I had so much muscle. Now it all turned to fat. Or they talk about athletes who maybe stopped playing the sport and their body composition is clearly shifted. All of his muscle turned to fat. Muscle doesn't turn to fat. It's impossible for that to happen. Muscle turning to fat would be like shrimp turning into olive oil. They are two completely separate entities. They're two totally different types of cells. One cannot evolve into the other. But it is worth noting that part of where this comes from is that muscle burns a lot of calories. So if you've got someone who's really muscular, they're burning a lot of calories at rest, even while they sleep. So if they do stop exercising or for whatever reason, they do lose that muscle mass, they are burning fewer calories. So using an athlete as an example, they're not training as much, they lose that muscle mass, but maybe their appetites haven't changed, their eating patterns haven't changed. They're burning fewer calories because they don't have the muscle, but they're still eating as much because they're eating like they used to when they were training so hard. So if they haven't adjusted their diet for their reduced level of activity or their reduced level of muscle, they've likely gained body fat. But their muscle didn't turn to fat. They simply lost muscle and gained fat.
Number 1.
Fat and body fat in particular, things that make us gain body fat and what helps us lose. So one of the biggest myths I hear is I try not to eat late at night because they think that eating late at night will make me fat. Here's the reality. Your body doesn't know what time it is. Your body doesn't know the difference between 6 p.m. or 8 or 9 p.m. So it's not like a meal that you eat at 6 o'clock is going to be stored immediately in your muscles and fueling your body. But if you had that same meal 2 hours later at 8 p.m., it's going to be stored as body fat. It's not going to happen. Your body doesn't know that difference within that narrow window. Now, there is an exception that some science shows us that if we eat during the time that our body expects that we should be sleeping, so during the hours that after midnight, 12, 1 for most of us, that those calories can be preferentially stored as body fat, but most of us aren't doing that. There are some people who do wake up and there's night eating, but that's a whole different podcast. But people who work shift work, some days, some nights, especially like nurses who work some days and some nights and it alternates, they'll often experience weight gain. And that is part of the reason why, because if we're eating in the middle of the night when our bodies think we should be sleeping, that is the exception, one exception that it can be stored preferentially as body fat. But if we're looking at you work late, your whole schedule is shifted late, maybe you don't even get home till 7, it's impossible to have dinner by 7 o'clock then. So dinner might be 9 o'clock, but your entire schedule shifted back. Maybe you don't go to bed till 12 on a regular basis and you're able to sleep till 8, or later, depending on what your schedule is. So everyone's schedule is different, and some people's entire life schedule is shifted back a few hours. And so if you're eating dinner at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, it doesn't matter. Your body doesn't know what time it is. But here's why so many different diet plans ban eating after 6 or 7 at night, because that's usually where you'll hear it. Don't eat past 6, don't eat past 7, according to XYZ diet. So for so many people, those evening hours are when willpower falters. So it's not simply that you're eating later at night, it's what you're eating later at night. It might be part of your dinner. Portions are too big of rice, pastas, potatoes, especially these starchy carbs that we don't need to fuel up at night because we're about to go to sleep. But that might be one culprit, is that our dinner is too much, too large, and maybe too much starchy, carby calories at night. But also for a lot of people, it's the after dinner stuff. So the mindless nighttime snacking, the cookies, ice cream, chips, all the stuff in the pantry or fridge, they can add up to hundreds or even thousands of calories. And in a lot of cases, it's way more in those after dinner hours than we even had at dinner. So if you arbitrarily say, don't eat past 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock or whatever it might be, you're immediately cutting out all of that excess. So that's why a lot of diet plans do call for it, but don't sweat it. If your entire schedule is just shifted late and you're going to have dinner at 8 o'clock and that's your usual, don't sweat it. Here's the other thing though. I do want to try to have at least 2 hours between dinner and bedtime for proper digestion, and ideally at least 3 hours. That 3-hour window between dinner and bedtime has also been shown to be beneficial for brain health and reducing our risk of incidence of things like Alzheimer's. So having dinner at 6, 7, 8 o'clock, no sweat. Don't worry about what time it is, but do try to leave at least 2 hours and ideally 3 hours between that dinner and bedtime. So there you have it. Top 10 myths that we hear all the time. Hopefully hearing the science helps you understand why they're myths, and you can now help us spread the word and spread what the real story is. I am Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life possible.